before we start off on anything heavy, I'd just like to point out something that I just observed this morning on the way to work, on the way to the studio. It was very interesting. There was a car that raced a cut in front of me, only to then slow down and take their time to make the next turn off. And I couldn't understand it. I could not understand what was the point. And this happens fairly regularly. Why are you racing to get ahead of another person, only to then slow down? There's nothing in front of you. You know where you're going. The person was going on McDonald's and Cipriani Boulevard, I believe, for whatever reason. Like, you have a destination, you have a goal. Or even worse yet, if you don't know where you're going, and you race ahead of somebody only to hold them up because you're trying to figure out what it is you're doing while holding up traffic, I don't understand. And I do wonder if that is just, an expression on a very small level, an example, an analogy of some of the issues we have with just how our society is being managed. Because we all have a part to play with managing our society. Best believe it. This is not the Republic of the politicians of Trinidad and Tobago. This is the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And while we can complain about what they do or do not do, and by the end of the show I'll probably have enough of those banked in, we have to be responsible as well because it's our country. It's not just their country. They don't own it. They are the chief stewards for us. And while, again, what does this have to do with managing the country? Well, some common sense. If you're going to slow down, don't rush in front of people just before you do it. And this happens fairly often on the roads. It's something that, I don't know if this used to happen before as a driver. I don't drive that much on a daily basis, generally speaking. There have been times when I work from home. There have been times when I worked and lived in Tobago. So, but I've noticed this phenomenon of I'm going to race to get what I want, except when I get there, I'm not entirely sure of what I'm doing. I'm going to hold everybody up. But that's okay because I am not inconvenienced and I don't seem to care who else is inconvenienced. I cannot do things like that. Maybe I'm just a different person. Maybe I like punishment. And I'm willing to take second fiddle to people who want to rush ahead of me. Life is too short. We already have an issue with road fatalities in this country. I don't want to add to that statistic. So let's get into the meat of the program. Now, obviously, my co-host cannot be here to join us. He sends his apologies. Hopefully, he will be able to join us soon. I don't want to necessarily disclose his private information, but all I will say is, he is a bit under the weather. We hope he gets well pretty soon. Meanwhile, the show must go on. So later on, joining me will be our former youth parliamentarian contributor, Mr. Kemuel Pascal. But until then, it's interesting how the timing always works out because the global situation is something we always keep our eye on, but we don't necessarily focus on it very often, at least not until some time has passed and there's some new developments, maybe a slight twist here or there to discuss. We don't want to necessarily just rehash the same thing over and over. The irony with that statement is usually the new twists, whether locally or globally, we end up complaining about the same things. The same problems continue to occur, but regardless, I wanted to speak with regards to the global economy because we all know about the pandemic. We lived through it for 2 years. Now it's 2020 part 2. Something new has come on the scene. We have Ukraine being invaded by Russia, Ukraine being a major supplier of wheat, both countries being major suppliers of energy. I think Russia as well also is a major supplier of food stuff. That war has disrupted trade even further after all of the issues that we've had because of the pandemic, and now where the container shortage starts, well, technically part of it, it also occurs due to what's going on in the ports of Los Angeles. Now in China, we have new developments. I'm sure most of you all are aware of it. Maybe you're not necessarily aware of what it means for the rest of us. We have a report from the BBC, first of all, to understand exactly just what is going on with lockdowns. At a point in time when we're trying to reopen the economy here, China is still going through with lockdowns. It doesn't seem to be working. Let's take a look at the BBC right now.
COVID lockdown, Shanghai style. 26 million people, by some measures the biggest city in the world, confined to their homes. But breaking through the silence, drone instructions. There have been desperate complaints of shortages of food, water and medicines, overburdened delivery networks, and growing protests. Public services are in chaos. One sick American, rather than being allowed to go home to isolate, was instructed to bed down on the ground outside a full hospital.
Look, I've been sleeping on the ground.
Man, our lockdowns are just a little different, you know. When they say that you're locked down, there's no going outside, there's no opening your doors. It's, you know, you just kind of do as you're told.
It's not just Shanghai. Across China, some 23 cities and 200 million people are under full or partial lockdown. And that's all having a severe impact on the massive Chinese economy. The Wuhan lockdown at the start of the pandemic in 2020 led to a historic collapse in economic activity in China. Amid the Shanghai lockdown, indicators are plunging again. But despite the draconian Shanghai lockdown, which began on the 28th of March, new COVID cases are continuing to rise, reflecting the awesome transmissibility of the Omicron variant. There are two domestic barriers to getting out of this. First, China's low vaccination rate among the elderly, particularly for the highly vulnerable over 80s.
Over 80 vaccination rate, if we look at the third dose, it's only about 20%. So it's extremely low, much lower than the Western countries. And the vaccination campaign is slowing down dramatically. The objective so far is to mitigate the transmission, to win more time. But if that's the objective, then that should be complied with a faster vaccination campaign and more people get vaccinated. But we don't say this in the data.
The other barrier is politics.
This is very closely associated with President Xi on his political legacy that managed to create a zero-COVID society. And the Chinese population expect a society that is COVID-free.
But the argument is from some that it's creating domestic instability. Does there come a point where there's more instability from the policy than there is from abandoning it?
Well, there's an interesting contradiction here. It's almost like a chicken or egg question, exactly what he wanted. He can't have a stability, but then he cannot have an economic prosperity. What I've noticed quite interesting is that recently the government talking so less about prosperity, but more about the stability. So I think at the end of the day, he'll carry on with zero COVID strategy.
The danger is, though, that the Chinese government has painted itself into an excruciatingly painful economic and social corner.
The lockdown situation in China is not only a threat to the Chinese economy, but the world economy as well, very much including the UK. Shanghai is home to the world's largest container port, which is now hobbled. The fear is of disruption to global supply chains, which are already severely stressed. Plus, China is the biggest single driver of global growth, and analysts are slashing their forecasts. In a nutshell, the Chinese situation ratchets up the stagflationary nightmare, that 1970s combination of high inflation and economic stagnation.
居民同志们，请大家做到不下楼梯，不出家门，不下来遛狗。
Stagnation on the streets of Shanghai. The great fear is that it won't stay there.
In a time when the world is reopening, and if you watched AM Prime this morning, you might have seen some reports where our Caribbean neighbors are anticipating. I know St. Lucia and Bahamas, or Bermuda, they're anticipating to have a rebound in their tourism, which means travel, international travel. That's where the expectations is. Despite the new variant, this new variant is very contagious. We do have to be careful, but for the most part, we've reached the point where we had 0 deaths on Sunday, and here comes China telling people, telling their citizens, control your soul's desire for freedom, do not open your window to sing. But then now, we do have to consider what it means for us. That's not going to affect us directly. What it's going to affect is manufacturing levels, economic growth. That economic growth is then going to cause a crunch on global trade. There's going to be more shortages. There's going to be more inflation. There's going to be problems with shipping. Cost of shipping is going to go up. Cost of basic goods, electronics, consumer electronics, food stuff. A lot of what we consume is made in China. China is the second largest economy in the world. China is a driver of global growth. What does this mean for us? We're not a tourism country that could go with those ebbs and flows. Maybe in some ways the Caribbean is better positioned for this than other regions. Maybe. I'm not an economist, much less a global economist. But in TNT, one of our debtors is China. One of our safety nets, maybe, if we need liquidity, is China. China's a safety net in that regard for a lot of countries. But given the situation with their construction industry as a whole, that industry dwarfs our GDP. It's 1/3 of their GDP. That's the situation that one industry, the construction sector, has put them in. There's a potential for it to be a housing market bubble that might bust, similar to what happened in 2008, 2009 in the States, if I am remembering my economic crisis timeline correctly. But then there is a bit more. We have another report. This is from the World Bank, I believe. And it goes into just, they've had to rethink their projections for the year. They've had to reduce it quite a bit. Again, what does this mean for us? Because, yes, prices are high in first world nations, but just $1 more in gas could cause such a reaction as it did last week. I don't know when it will end. Let's hear what the spokesperson from the World Bank had to say about the situation.
You know, the array of disruptions from China's new lockdowns, from the impacts yet to be fully felt of the Russia-Ukraine war on food prices, on global supply chains. And if, you know, bad came to worse, could there be another episode of financial contagion? All these are risks on the downside. We are living a period of exceptional uncertainty.
But you know, you mentioned a lot of things you've been talking about, and maybe they've intensified your warnings. But you know, debt crises, financial contagion, food shortages, a lot of concern about that leading to social unrest, political instability. Do you see that this is the kind of thing that really does finally create that debt crisis in emerging markets that feeds into something that becomes more systemic as this concern grows globally in markets?
Will this be the straw that broke the camel's back? Emerging markets, even before COVID, many of them had a lot of challenges. They've seen debt rise. They importantly had seen significant slowdown in growth. They had seen both fiscal conditions deteriorate, poverty reduction slow down. In other words, they were not doing well. Then comes COVID. Sri Lanka is a clear illustration of a country that held on for a while. You know, the big question was, will it default? Ultimately, of course, it has. And food crises, you can go back to the French Revolution, right? The price of bread. When food prices rise, very often governments panic, put on price controls. Price controls are very costly and also not very effective. A much better mechanism to help those impacted, those households, is through social safety nets. Bad times breed discontent with governments. They also breed all kinds of civil unrest. If you look at, for example, the indices published by Freedom House, what you see is in the last few years, especially accelerating in the last couple of years, decline in democratic values. The low-income countries that are disproportionately, and middle-income countries are also disproportionately affected by higher food prices, continued slow growth, and governments that are overspent and can't do much about it. Social unrest is something to be concerned about. Coups are on the rise. And I argued that one of the things that really helped emerging markets in the aftermath of the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009 was China's very vibrant double-digit growth. China's growth boosted commodities. They did a lot of lending to developing countries. They were a big engine. That engine is stalling big time at the moment. So the implications for emerging markets range from China becoming more circumspect in lending to them to the trade relationships and commodity effects.
So therein lies the problem. Multiple regions of the world are going to be in heavy distress. And I keep saying this, first with COVID, now with this. It's not as though there is a significant portion of the world somewhere out there that is untouched, that has reserves, that we could ask to get, a little slice of, and by we I mean everybody else who is affected, so that, we could share the burden as equally as possible. Everywhere is affected. Everywhere is affected. Even in the United States, right, there is significant debate with regards to how their economy is going, how their government is deficit spending, the price of gas over there. In Europe, you have the same situation. So energy prices, cost of food, cost of shipping, these things are global. There's no escaping from it. And we don't necessarily have anyone who could bail us out. To some extent, we're going to be on our own. And while I don't necessarily see the major critical mistake that the government has made just yet, at the end of the day, I hear it from people around me with regards to the price of food going up, complaining, what is the government doing? What is the government doing? What is the government doing? They need to do something. They need to do something. Of course, to be fair, they don't ask the critical question, what is there that the government can do? Not necessarily what they are legally authorized to do, but literally what they have the capacity right now, Tuesday the 19th of April, 2022, what can they do? As opposed to what we wish they could do, what we hope they could do. However, the representative from the World Bank said it there. Rising food prices leads to economic issues lead to social unrest leads to political instability. The irony of these words is, as I have thought, it was my opinion, these sort of things started happening from the pandemic. We might see more of these things. That situation in China, with the crackdown on Hong Kong, with the emphasis on internal security, more censorship, and you're seeing it in Russia too, where they want to censor and control the news so that they could ensure their security concerns. That's because of the economic issues that they had, well, from COVID now to this war. And it will continue. And it could happen in other countries. We are fortunate that in our region, we have not had a major situation. We have not seen Venezuela further destabilized because of it. The question is, Lord only knows what those people have had to endure given the state of their economy before COVID. But this could further put a strain on global trade. And we have to be ready for it. It's why back when the budget presentation happened, I asked, what do we have planned in case of another external shock? I didn't think we had anything significant ready. Our foreign cash reserves, that's not going to sustain us if things really get bad in the long run. And before we close, I'd just like to point out something. When the pandemic started and everybody saw China make a hospital in 10 days, there were some people who might have said, hey boy, we really need to be more like China. Yeah, it's 2022. We are reopening. China is forcing their people to not even allow themselves to open their windows to sing. Control your desire for freedom. Anyway, let's not take for granted what we have in TNT, but let's take a quick break right now. When we come back, I'll just touch on something a little bit more personal to me, something that I think is important for all of us though. Maybe it's a bit of a reminder for you folks watching me right now, but I think it's important to talk about. And then after that, we'll be joined by Kemuel Pascal, former youth parliamentarian. We will speak about Port-of-Spain General, WASA, maybe a few other things. Interestingly enough, China's construction had to pull out a Port-of-Spain General. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
We dare you to dream, to see beyond the struggle, to envision the possibilities, to live life with unlimited vision. Ferrera Optical supports you with complete eyewear starting at only $795. Let's make those dreams a reality. So book your visit via 227-7000, WhatsApp message 278-2878, or at FerreraOptical.com today. We dare you to keep going. Ferrera Optical says, don't limit your vision.
Join the journey to the Northern Range. Come, sing the chorus. Family, a tribute to Lord Nelson.
So we holding on, going from dusk to dawn.
North Coast Jazz, born here, played here.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit? Yes. What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive. It is not rehabilitative.
We, the police officers, we are professional, and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole. It's for all of us in public.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Sight, Thursdays at 11:30 a.m., only on WESN, Content Capital.
If you live with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 and has to self-isolate at home, take care of them from a distance and reduce their movement around the house. Give them space, a designated space, and open those windows. If you have to be in contact, mask up, both of you. If you work, stay home from work and don't go out, not even to the grocery or pharmacy. And remember, no visitors allowed. Limit the contact to limit the spread.
The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back. Well, I just outlined some not so good news. Now, it's hard to predict these things, how it will go, particularly with regards to the severity of the situation. That's one of the things that the representative from the World Bank said. They've only downgraded their forecast, I believe, by 1% or 2%, but that and all on a global scale is a big deal. However, this is just one more thing to stress about. I'm sure now with the rising price of food, rising transportation costs, a lot of people have a lot of economic uncertainty. We haven't reached the stage of political unrest yet. But this can't be easy for a lot of people. And I could say this because I know that it is not easy for those in my immediate circle. Both family, co-workers, friends. There's not a single area where this has not touched my family. And we're kind of left in a very, very difficult time. Now, what does stress mean? Well, in TNT, according to statistics, our suicide rate is up. This might not be news to you. We've gone from 92 to 104 to 128. That's the last 3 years. 128 in 2021. We just had another murder-suicide. This is not necessarily the sort of thing that the TTPS could stop. How do you dissuade someone who wants to commit a murder-suicide? They're not worried about tomorrow because to them there is no tomorrow. Or even worse, they do have respect for our criminal justice system, and that's what causes them to resort to such extreme measures. Now, for me, given both I have to deal with high-stress news, because I internalize some of these things, unfortunately, but also the economic challenges that we all have to face, including myself. I also have an issue with high blood pressure, something that I revealed a couple of weeks ago. There's an interesting study coming out of the United States about a month ago, I believe. We have from New York a report about high blood pressure, COVID and high blood pressure. Let's get that clip.
My blood pressure definitely went up.
And doctors say 60-year-old Ken Olivier isn't alone.
Here in New York City, we're seeing elevations of blood pressure across the board.
I even saw it in myself. My blood pressure went up during COVID as well, and several colleagues have said the same thing.
A new study published in the American Heart Association's journal Circulation showed an increase in blood pressure in both men and women at the onset of the pandemic.
It was a dramatic change in their lifestyles. So we see increased weight, we see increased alcohol use, we see more of a sedentary lifestyle, as well as poor eating habits.
Using health data from an employee wellness program, researchers looked at blood pressure dating back to 2018, 2019, and 2020 for nearly 500,000 adults with an average age of 46. But from April 2020 to December 2020, more people had higher blood pressure. It showed that before the pandemic, blood pressure was largely unchanged.
The highest increase was actually seen in women.
Dr. Luke Laffin says it's not clear why. He's the co-director of the Center for Blood Pressure Disorders at the Cleveland Clinic and lead study author.
The pandemic put stress on women, particularly women that work, and the stress of potentially helping their kids through remote learning and not taking the time to exercise or eat right or fill that prescription medication.
Would you say this study is a wake-up call?
But you can't forget about just our general or routine health maintenance.
High blood pressure causes adverse cardiac events, strokes, heart attacks, other problems.
Doctors urge it's safe to return to your doctor's office. You can also get an at-home blood pressure cuff or get checked at your pharmacy and report the numbers to your doctor. And make sure you're taking your medication. As for Olivier's BP,
and it's now much better after losing 15 pounds.
What went up needs to come down. On the east side, Alice Gaynor, CBS 2 News.
So, ladies and gentlemen, listen. It's not the only NCD, and we've spoken about this before, but it's now personal to me. That's the irony. I went through COVID. I'm not entirely sure how long I've been suffering from high blood pressure, and I have yet to really get a full handle on the situation. Now, for me, the cardiologist said I should be okay in the short term. I don't have to worry about anything critical happening to me right now. I do have to worry about down the line. However, that's my situation. I think one of the things that we need to really now take seriously, I would advise everybody, particularly now, for high blood pressure, but also for things like your diabetes if you haven't been taking your medication, for any other NCD. If you have a bad persistent symptom, a bad cough, bad headaches, whatever, get yourself checked out, get yourself tested, see where you're at. Because I haven't had to go to the doctor for a good couple of years before this. So again, it went unknown, and hence the silent killer. And I think one of the major issues now is a lot of people, I'm sure, out there are going to be having stress at their workplace. And the trick, of course, is that they can't necessarily leave their job, which might be more stressful now as we're moving towards economic recovery. Maybe everybody has to pull a little bit more weight, work a little bit harder. But it's not as though you could just leave your job, because the whole situation of the economy is one big stress. Keeping your job for some people will be a big stress. But then if you have high blood pressure and you can't deal with the stress, what do? Again, this is why it's important to not just let this build up in the background and say, I'm going to deal with it tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, in 5 years, in 10 years. It's too late. And it will go to 10 years. For some people, it will go to 10 years. And then it's too late. Dr. Bagan said to us, you know, if you don't treat these things, when you start back treatment, you do not recover to where you were from before. The damage could never be fixed. That's ironically very stressful to think about. We have to consult with our doctors and do everything we can to manage it. And that means in TNT, for a lot of us, big changes in lifestyle with regards to our diet, our sleeping patterns, our drinking patterns. And for some of us, not all of us, our exercise patterns. But I will leave this topic there for now, and hopefully I will have positive updates from my personal situation. And Colin, let me know about your situation. We could share this journey together, walk this journey together with regards to dealing with our high blood pressure. But we are ending one stressful time to come into another stressful time. Don't take it for granted. With that said, we're going to move straight on. No need for a break, because quick as a flash, I am joined by former youth parliamentarian, and let me remind the viewers at home, not just for our National Youth Parliament, but I believe for both regional and CARICOM as well. He is also someone who is studying mass communication, so he knows a little bit, a thing or two about journalism and public relations. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kemuel Pascal. Good morning, Kemuel.
Good morning, Sean. It's really my pleasure to be here, and what an introduction. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know, every now and then, you know, we need to celebrate the people in our lives and their accomplishments. But with that said, you know, a lot has happened. A lot has happened. You pointed out something to me when we were talking last night. I actually forgot about this. You know, it's a very interesting situation because we are watching China struggle. economically and with COVID. And now we have a situation where UDCOT, once again, stop me if you've heard this before, there are questions with regards to UDCOT awarding contracts. And we have a new bill, or maybe not a new bill to be fair, but we have construction which is going to take at least 2 more years. And depending on the situation, the inflation might cause those costs to rise even further than what was probably initially projected. Now, on one hand, you can't necessarily fault the government for what's going on with Ukraine. Just as, like I said, you know, people can't take credit for the new prices of oil or for any decision that is benefiting in the past that is now benefiting because of this tragedy that could not have been foreseen. We can't necessarily put all the blame because, again, this situation could not have been foreseen. However, UDCOT is not new to controversy, is it? As I said before, I mean, I believe the last PNM administration, correct me if I'm wrong, the last PNM administration got into some serious hot water, not just over issues with regards to UDCOT, but was called out on those issues by the current sitting Prime Minister. Now, I'm just saying that that is more tongue-in-cheek, right? It's not as though, I'm not saying Dr. Rowley has his hand in some proverbial cookie jar and this is rampant corruption left, right, and center. But at the very least, don't you think there's questions with regards to the health of UDCOT?
Yes, that's correct. Because of course we would have seen, as you mentioned, the previous PNM administration that would be under Prime Minister Manning back between 2007 and 2010 would have obviously had issues with UDCOT, and the person who would have led UDCOT at the particular time, even when you think about the awarding of contracts and things like that. So it's quite interesting to see that something almost similar has occurred now with the Central Block, which should have actually was supposed to have commenced in 2009 if we take a look at the report that basically condemned the Central Block since back then. So potentially there could have been issues back then, but the issues have risen right now, and so it's for the government to deal with it.
I mean, so 2009. This is not a topic, so forgive me if I am unaware. And maybe that's good because I can ask questions for people who are also unaware to get the relevant information. But you said 2009. Now, I do remember that the People's Partnership put a lot of effort and made great noise about their new children's hospital. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with a new children's hospital. My problem was half of the hospital was not equipped for children, it was equipped for adults. My other problem was the fact that while you might have had an issue with shortages for children's ward spaces, in some hospitals, it seemed as though the hospitals around the Couva, that bracket Couva, were not necessarily those facing that issue. Meanwhile, Port-au-Spain General is languishing. Now, I mean, does that bring you now any pause to consider the opposition's criticisms on the situation when I'm not saying that they're totally to blame. We've had 7 years of a PNM administration. Let's get that clear. But doesn't this then come to make you wonder, why are they even bothering for? This is just pot calling kettle black?
What I do think it is that, yes, we would have understood, we understand the problems that the Central Block had even back in 2009, based on the reports that were made public. However, the opposition failed to do anything about it, and as you mentioned, they would have gone the way of building a hospital in Couva, which was supposed to be their big thing as the children's hospital, noting that nowhere else in the Caribbean has a children's hospital, and it's time that the children of Trinidad and Tobago are able to seek medical care here as opposed to having to go to the US. They would have also established the Children's Life Fund and things like that. However, the thing that I do take in, that I would say is that, one, the Central Block of the Port-au-Spain General Hospital also serves a large catchment of persons because of the density of the population in Western Trinidad and Port of Spain and probably in environs, right? But then you also have to take into consideration that the Southern Regional Health Authority, or the Southwestern, the SWRHA, they are the largest RHA in Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, their region starts from just about Hoover all the way down to as far as to as far as Point Fortin, Cedros, Icacos, and spreads even further east to Rio Claro and that kind of thing. So I think it's a matter of priority, because essentially I would have gone the way of building the central block first based on what the report said, and still going forward with a children's hospital. But I think it's a matter of they are now calling on the government for the issue of the central block when they themselves failed to deal with it during their tenure.
I mean, so we've seen it with Mr. Manning and the waterfront. We saw it with Mr. Pandey and Piarco. We saw it then with Mrs. Bisessa and the Couva Children's Hospital. Now we're seeing it with Dr. Rowley, and with the failed attempt to start Sandals, and now with the new airport in Crown Point. It seems as though politicians really want to get some sort of project done where they could, and it begs the question, is this a look at me, I did that? Now you could argue that Piarco was necessary, bungled, but you know, there were still benefits to the bigger airport. The waterfront, there were some benefits to the waterfront. I think we haven't necessarily gotten the figures to truly justify. But for the most part, I don't think that it was a complete, it was a complete write-off. There were benefits to the waterfront. The Children's Hospital in Couva, some benefits, maybe when we needed it, but I don't know if we even have the capacity to operate all these hospitals. That's the interesting thing. We have other issues with our healthcare system. And I do have to wonder, like, we have other issues with healthcare, but it seems like they just want to build hospitals. We can't solve staffing and supply shortage issues. What about with schools? We have problems with the facilities management of schools. MTS might go the way of EFCL. What about what other areas do we have issues with? But it seems like the government is like, well, we'll just build more things. Build more things. Do you think we have a problem with building too much unnecessary investments?
What I do think it's a matter of a lot of governments over the years have had a liking towards having flagship projects, and you would have mentioned it. So in the case of the UNC, their flagship projects would have been the Children's Hospital, which they really do acclaim to, the National Racquet Center in Tacarigua. Then you have the cycling velodrome right in Couva. And well, they would have boasted that they started the Sampson and the 2.14 highway, which still hasn't been completed after being started some 11 years ago this year. And so the thing about it is that it's a matter of we've been over this in the past. When we look at the Brian Lara Stadium, which had to be completed by another PNM administration. And so it really begs the question of what is the purpose of doing all these projects and having issues in the past? Is it that we aren't learning from our previous mistakes in terms of the awarding of contracts, the monitoring of projects, ensuring that proper project management is really in place? Because you can't tell me it's taxpayers' money that is being expended upon these projects, and over the years it's the same thing continuously. We have the same problem. It's just a cycle over and over. A project starts, you can almost expect that when a government comes in, there will be some project that they will fail in, or there will be cost overruns, or they may have to stop and restart, and that's just the cycle continuing.
Well, with this hospital project, we're talking now a decade. With the sporting facilities, I think that's an interesting example where we do really have to ask, what are we getting out of these facilities? Because it's not as though we have a system to churn out high achievers like Jamaica with regards to track and field, right? We have all these different facilities, almost like if we want to show off on the rest of the Caribbean, what are we actually doing with them? Now, with regards to cost overruns, herein lies the question with this project, because we don't know to what extent is it because of COVID and cost of shipping, and how much did that affect things and estimates and all of those financial figures and profitabilities and margins, etc. And how much of it was just mismanagement. It's difficult to know in this case because we have to accept that, okay, yes, we do have inflation. We just have inflation right now. It's affecting everything. Now we're looking to local contractors. Are these contracts to finish the project, inflated because of inflation, or are they inflated because this is just what happens with regards to government contracts, particularly
I think
in Unicor?
it's just what happens, to be quite honest. And I mean, in some cases, it will be inflation because obviously, but if you take the Brand Lara Stadium, for example, the cost that they would have had to finish it back when they were attempting to build it would not be the same cost that the current government came in its attempt to finish it. That would be an ultimately different cost because there would have obviously been an inflation on the prices of things. The cost of construction would have gone up. Different issues, plus some of the infrastructure that would have been in place from the start would have obviously aged, and they would have had to either refurbish it or even totally change them out. So I think it's a matter of both inflation and also there's just simply, because contractors in some cases feel that, well, it's the government, we just can overcharge them. But I mean, the government, they do have options in terms of the awarding of contracts and who would get the contract ultimately.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the cheapest is not always the best. Sometimes, you award a contract to the cheapest, and it's because they cut the price so low, and then they try to cut corners, and what we end up with, maybe Piarco, at least in some areas of Piarco, some parts of Piarco, where things are not necessarily looking all that new and fancy. I want to get into another topic. It's something that I thought of between last night and this morning. And there have been criticisms with regard to the response to the situation that led to the traffic jam on Thursday, right? So I don't know if you saw. Well, there was a whole WASA was trying to fix a leak. And the problem is the leak is basically on part of one of the major arteries that goes west of St. James, right?
Correct.
And basically the complaint that I've heard, at least from one person in media, is that, well, there was no communication to try to prevent people from reaching all the way to the leak and then having the police to try and redirect traffic. There was no plan in place. Now, here's the thing. So TNTech happened. It was very sudden. It was something that you didn't anticipate, right? And TNTech communicated about it, whatever they could. It took a long time to fix, but at least they were communicating. The argument being that if there was some communication, maybe we would have avoided people from, going down the foreshore, then having to be redirected, and then congesting all of St. James, and any congestion, the backlog just keeps piling up. Because here's the interesting thing. They've spent so much effort arguing about the safety of our electrical grid. It's such a national security issue. All you need is one pothole, Kemuel. One pothole will basically have our entire Western traffic system collapse. One pothole. If you wanted to do some sort of political statement, some sort of non-violent vandalism to create a political message, or you don't need to worry about the power grid, you just need one pothole. And so, what do you think about that? Because it doesn't seem that we're ready for something so simple as a pothole.
Yeah. So the thing was that I would have been in a meeting for the entire day, basically. It's only when I came out of the meeting, probably about after 2, then I really heard about the situation. And it was to the point that I heard that the situation, the pothole would have developed, or the sink, whatever it was in the road, would have developed sometime the night before. But the issue really was a matter of communication, because WASA didn't properly communicate with the public, so that the public could have been made aware of the fact that there has been a sink in the road and they are now attempting to fix it. And as you mentioned, to the point where persons were actually reaching up to the sink, and then they would have had to have been turned back and then redirected. And it also speaks to an overall traffic plan. I don't know if you recall when the previous government had considered building a causeway to Chaguaramas because of the amount of traffic that end usually has, because it's basically one way in and one way out when you really think about it. But then I can also link it to the issue of, I don't know if you remember when they were doing the work on the in the BTM probably about 2 or 3 months ago, and we were speaking about it, where it was that WASA was doing work, but there were also TNTEC lines in the ground, and it speaks to our planning. So a lot of issues, traffic issues, communication, planning, and everything on the whole.
I mean, that's an interesting point. You would think that after, we have a problem, WASA is running into TNTEC lines. What's the procedure for that? What's the procedure so that when we know we're going to run into a situation, we could go to these things one time, have them in place one time? I would assume the Ministry of Works and Transport should have somebody down there alongside WASA. This is not some small out-of-the-way road we're talking about in some of these cases. With BTM, it was a sewage leak. This is not just an inconvenience of a leak that had to be fixed. This was a sewage leak that was going on for months. In this case, a traffic plan, because this is not, I believe, the only situation where in the country where you have to look at a practically one way in, one way out. I myself, because of an accident, got stuck on that same road in the opposite direction coming out of Diego Martin. And there was no alternative. In part because, now, to be fair, it was an accident, fine, I get it. But we don't have any backup road systems to even attempt to trickle some of the traffic through. But more importantly, and I understand where the commission is coming from, but one of the newspaper editorials said it best. Where's all of the planning? As you have said, what happens if we have a real emergency? What happens if we have, some sort of freak storm, freak earthquake? What are we going to do then? And do we now as a population, do we have the confidence that these things could be managed if a pothole is enough to sink us?
Well, that's the thing about it. It's a situation where planning isn't really considered, because, as you were mentioned, that's a major roadway into the West essentially. And so I'd have liked to think when TNTEC was putting their lines and WASA was putting their lines, there would have been some amount of communication, because from the footage that I saw, the TNTEC pipe was running, and right above it there were the lines within some pipes. So obviously TNTEC would have come after the WASA line would have already been placed there. And it really speaks to plan. How can you tell me that a major road, we don't know what is running, what lies under a major roadway? That's kind of ridiculous when we think about planning and our infrastructure. As you mentioned, in the event of a national disaster or national emergency, there really is essentially no proper plan in place. You see it for simple floods. There's no proper way for people to communicate in Trinidad and Tobago. Even when we look at just back in February 17th, when we had the power outage, basically everything was shut down. You couldn't communicate. You didn't know what was happening with your family, your relatives, and it speaks to a lack of planning for national disasters and things and other things across the board.
Yeah, because that's a good point there. When the blackout happened, telecommunications was affected as well. Maybe not severely, but the irony, of course, is as we're going to digital, for some of our viewers may not understand, back in the day, your landline might have been fine, but your cell phone and your internet service, that's a whole different ball game when TNTEC gets cut. Now, interestingly enough, the day before, the CEO of WASA got suspended. And I do have to wonder, what is going on in the Water and Sewage Authority? What kind of a sign is this? Because on one hand, you have the Paris situation where it seems as though the government is playing favorites with board members. And, you have the Minister of Everything running cover for the board at Paria. But here now you have WASA, and you could argue that WASA is the situation, the tragedy in Paria. I don't want to take anything away from that, but the situation with regards to the importance to the nation, we're talking about, Crix is not the vital supplies here. Water is, right? The situation with the nation, and the CEO is suspended, and do we even have a good explanation as to what's going on? This is not the first time that WASA has been in the news, in recent news with regards to its management, and we already reach a point where we're trying to restructure it. What does that actually mean in implementation in the end? Like, I don't know what to make of this. I do not know what to make of this.
Well, I am just as confused as you, because what I'm saying is that, and I'm glad that you brought up that, because of the fact that this is not the first CEO of WASA or executive CEO, something like that. I think that's the correct title. That has, this one has been suspended by the board, but the previous one, he had resigned, and Mr. Gonzalez did say that they had a cordial conversation and they ended on proper terms. But I'd like to think that I'm just wondering what is really happening at WASA, because obviously they would have laid a report in Parliament and all of that as to what they intend to do or what needs to be done at WASA or what's happening at WASA. But we, the public, we aren't seeing anything happening. We're not seeing anything happening with regards to the state of WASA, any type of restructuring. I don't see anything happening. And now with the suspension of the CEO, that's something that needs to be resolved. And then with the board and a lot of things. So I think Minister Gonzalez should probably address us probably within this week to give us some sort of update as to what is taking place.
Well, my only concern there is that usually a minister is not free, or at least he might have some freedom, and then the first sign of trouble, they will yank it away to comment on an individual basis, which is strange, because while they control, it seems to me the government controls what is said by their cabinet members. What they don't do is potentially try to brief their various MPs and cabinet members on various issues, what to say, what not to say. But back to WASA though, because we've heard, I guess, it's not proven, I haven't seen evidence of it, right? It's not proven in a court of law, but we've heard that the union has more or less has influence over management and management type decisions. Do you think at the end of the day, fears of union busting needs to just be pushed aside and we just need this restructuring now, because this is, how many issues could we have before we finally push the button and say we're over it? We can't afford this.
Well, the thing about it is that they just need to come to the table at this point, because soon enough it will be 2 years, I'm thinking, since the report was laid, sometime probably early next year or late this year. And it's a matter of time is going. We intend to do so, well, the government rather intends to do something about WASA based on what they have stated, but we have not seen any type of action, any strong action in that sense. I don't know if they're probably delaying it because it maybe involves the sending home of persons, and probably within the current economic climate and with everything, price of things raising and stuff, they probably decided they want to defer it a little bit, but at least communicate with the public, let the citizenry know, because once you have a lack of communication, that's where you basically breed rumors and speculation, and that's not what you want to have in a country. I wouldn't say a controlled setting, but that's not what you really want to have. You want to have an informed citizenry, an informed public, so people are aware and they know exactly what is happening, where the state is and where the state is concerned in terms of restructuring of WASA.
Well, my only thing to respond to that, though, is while we do have to worry about the sending home people in the current times, any other day, if that happened on a normal weekday, I'm sure there would have been a serious economic cost, and it probably was an economic cost to that traffic jam, where business activity essentially ceased for every business that more or less relied on any sort of use of the roadways during those hours. And we were lucky that it was at the start of a long weekend and that people had time to recover, because these things do cost. But we have to end this here. News on the Hour is next on WASN, I think. If not, No news. I've been told in my ear, no news. However, we do have to take a break. When we come back, we'll open up the phone lines. We could talk about this. We could talk about my high blood pressure if you want. We could talk about Ukraine, China, whatever you want to talk about. But we will talk about it together with you, the viewer. Sean Michael Small, Talking Point, WSN, your content capital. We'll be right back.
Join the journey to the Northern Range. Come, sing the chorus. Family, a tribute to Lord Nelson.
So we holding on, going from dusk to dawn.
North Coast Jazz, born here, played here.
Burning questions, urgent topics. Welcome back to One on One, the show where we tackle the most current and pertinent subjects that are affecting all citizens, where we ask the hard questions and have in-depth conversations. What separates One on One from other talk shows is that the conversation stems from a younger perspective on topics that affect the fabric of our society. One on One, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on WESN Content Capital.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
It may seem like the hardest thing to do right now, but we all need each other to wear a mask, wash our hands, watch our physical distance, and stay at home. We need you safe. Together we can make the difference. Together we can curb the spread of COVID-19. So let's be responsible in our actions. The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back to Talking Point. Sean Michael Small joined with Kemuel Pascal. How could I forget him with the outro into the last break? However, he is still with us, folks, and we are hearing the phone lines buzzing, so I will hold off from what I was going to say. Just going to say the numbers for you: 6229-338, 6239-376. Call in. Give us your point of view. We have a caller from Diego Martin. Good morning.
Thank you. Keaton, sorry you're not here. Sean, I'm glad you showed that China piece, because that's actually what I meant to talk about. Because remember, a few weeks ago when the wave started, I mentioned the irony of their zero COVID policy was working against them and Hong Kong. So apart from the deaths, lockdown, starvation, poor hospitals, manufacturing being down, truckers have to sleep in their trucks on highways. People who can work even will have to now sleep there at their workplace after the lockdowns are over. I find all of that is very scary, because now we do not know what will transpire. So to me, it's not like we're back there again in terms of global instability. You know, it's worse, because first there was COVID trying to recover. Then there's war trying to deal with that. Now there could be COVID again, you know,
Yes.
because it's just another layer upon a layer. And don't even get into Taiwan, you know. And I love Father Jason's optimism, but that's why he's here to spread hope. Honestly, people need to pay attention, especially when governments are not too trustworthy. And secondly, the gridlock here was just horrific. Again, not the first time in that exact spot by Sean, by
I
Pete's,
think that's true,
Sean.
yes.
I distinctly remember the earth opening and you could fall into, and you never know until you get there. No planning, no foresight. They discovered electricity lines when they open up. I mean, like, really? You know? So, yeah, that's it for now. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Just want to reiterate, China, the problem is they don't have high vaccine levels despite being a manufacturer. And COVID is more or less now coming through some of these places in a major way for the first time. So the place where it started, a new variant could come out and restart the whole thing once again. It's a possibility. I hope I didn't jinx the world. Camille, your thoughts?
Yeah, quite interesting. And as she would have mentioned, this is not the first time that there would have been a sinkhole right in that exact vicinity. And it seems as though we haven't learned anything from the past experiences.
That seems to be a reoccurring narrative of Trinidad and Tobago. Maybe other places too, but we know it very well here. We have another caller from Tobago. Morning.
How was your weekend?
My weekend was okay. My weekend was okay. I did avoid the traffic though.
Right. What alarms me is that we have so much institutes of higher education in Trinidad, and we cannot get management and communication right. Management and communication is the whole problem. Don't care what contract or what institution is running. Management and communication is like, I don't know, and these things are so easy. My problem is that I figure we put the wrong people in these positions.
Well, not just that, caller. Not just that. But if that's all, I would thank you and let you go and respond off air. You have anything more to add? All right, thank you, caller. Not just that, because I do know, Kemian and I, we do share some very good lecturers with regards to communication. One of them, Miss Mitchell, if you're watching this, I miss you too. One of them did reiterate to me that perhaps the problem could be that we have the people in position, it's just the ones in charge don't listen to the people in position. We have another caller from Aruka.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, morning.
Morning.
I'm calling because I want to commend WESN for showing all those Easter, those Christian movies over the Easter weekend. You know, I really appreciated what you all have done. You all are different to some of the other channels that I tune into. So I keep watching those Christian movies, which remind us, we as Christians, some of us, we saw what Jesus did for us, how he taught us, how he died for us, how he was crucified. And this is something to remind us of what Jesus went through for us. So, and I hope that no matter how bad the situation is right now, especially in Trinidad, we still have hope. And we must always put our hope in the man Christ Jesus. We put him first, you know. So I hope that the WSN will continue to, you know, show movies like these to remind us what some of us will forget, you know, the things that Jesus did for us and how he was still brutally treated, you know. And I keep turning on. And you know, there's another program too, the Rhythm and Rhyme. All those things, it was really enjoyable. So I really did enjoy your Easter programming. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. For those of you who might not understand what the caller exactly was saying, she was speaking in regards to the Easter message, and I think what she had to say there was very pertinent. This is a time under great stress I would advise people, I'm a Catholic myself, but I would tell people, look, it is always good to find something that you could believe in to help give you strength in times of great turmoil where your strength might not be enough, wherever you may find it, but please find it in a healthy place. Of course, therein lies the catch. Camille, anything to add?
Well, yeah, the call was a bit distorted, but I got the gist of what you were saying, and it's certainly great to come in WSN because you all obviously show content that, like, for example, the football game, no other station would have been able to carry the game. Come on. So, yeah, WSN always.
I mean, the capital of content. We have another call on the line. Diego Martin, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, morning.
Well, Mr. Moore, I'm very sorry to hear about your health concern. And my advice to you, I'll lend an advice to you that everything is in your hands. And doctors can only advise you. When we are young, we do all sorts of things and we eat and drink all sorts of things. I was in that same position myself. I never suffered with pressure and things until I was in my 50s. And that's the first time I visited a doctor and so on. So what you need to do, I mean, you do everything in moderation. Don't tell the doctor to stop using salt and sugar and all these things. You do everything in moderation and you monitor yourself. Get your machine and test the pressure daily.
Yeah.
I do that. And I am good to go. So it all depends on your health is in your hands. It's nothing to be not seriously worried about. Once you come follow your way and make sure that you do the things that you know you should do, you won't have much of a problem. You can live with this thing forever and forever and forever. So you just take care of yourself, my friend, and I hope season is all right. And I wish you take care of yourself and so I can have opportunities to talk to you like I am doing now. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Diego Martin. On behalf of my co-host, Keaton Shaw, I also thank you for your concerns and well wishes. We have another caller from Shagonas. Good morning, caller. Morning, Professor.
Morning.
The question of special purpose companies is very relevant to your discussion this morning.
Yes.
A special purpose company was for some activity that is not suited to the normal public service procedures. How could one justify things like NEDCO and UDICON? Those are naturally for the works department. And a special purpose company, when you make it, is to carry out a job. They don't do any job. All they do is give out contract. Right? So why at all you created them? And the reason they create them is you look at all the contracts government do, and nobody monitors them. They are of very poor quality. And the reason for that is if you check people who are involved in these things, to get any contract today in government, you have to have a kickback of at least 30%. Right? And that, gentlemen, is the cause of all these problems. Nobody free to say it. I mean, everybody free to say it, but that is a fact. You look at any job you do, the fix a road here, you could see it ain't going to last a week. Thank you, gentlemen. Any questions?
No.
No, not sure.
Once again, I cannot disagree with what you said. I have to agree. It's not necessarily a point, the detail we did not necessarily bring up, but we alluded to it, but I'm glad that you brought it up because we might have left it unsaid for the entire show with regards to special purpose companies that award contracts. It's a recipe for corruption. This is literally one of the avenues that allows for it to happen.
You know what's the worst? We do it on the revenue now. You have a revenue after it, that's going to be our end. Because the oldest activity of government is to collect revenue.
Well, I mean, I thank you, caller. I don't even want to know how revenue, it's one thing with regards to awarding contracts. I don't want to know how that might also turn into a fiasco. The only thing though, caller, is I do have to ask, to what extent are we confident that government's revenue collection isn't already a fiasco. That's the only thing. And there's, I mean, yes, I know I asked a question after you hung up the phone, but it's a rhetorical one. I'm not expecting you to answer that. I mean, Camille, any thoughts with regards to that and special purpose companies?
Before that, in fact, correct, special purpose companies do have their purpose by nature of just their name, special purpose company. Example, the public service can't necessarily do the work that Fashion TT does, or Export TT, or Sport TT, or even Nedco. And I mean, we have a host of other companies, but there's a but. The question is, are these companies functioning within their purpose and doing what they were mandated to do?
And therein lies the next question. Those that are not corrupt, those that are operating as they're supposed to be, in good faith, doing the work they were set up for. Now, maybe the work they were set up for might be politically motivated, might not be the best use of resources. That's not their fault. Somebody above them made that decision. They wanted the company was set up, they got people to do the company, to do the job, they're hired to do the job, they're acting in good faith. How do we know which is which? Because one of the other concerns is, then you have the witch hunts. You have a problem and you overreact to the problem. You have witch hunts, and then innocent people, innocent companies, some of them doing important work or at least beneficial work, get caught up in the drama. And they wipe the slate clean. We start from scratch when we don't have to start from scratch. Is this just a cycle that less? Is this something you think that is unique to less developed younger nations, or is this something that happens globally throughout the world in many countries?
I mean, of course, there would be issues globally, but I do think that we do have a lot of issues here in Trinidad, in particular, with the issues of special purpose companies. When you look at the TDC, which was scrapped by the present government in their first term, and then was made into Tourism Trinidad and Tourism Tobago Limited, two separate companies. Then when they came in, there was this issue of the hiring of persons within Sport TT. All the persons were fired from Sport TT to bring in new persons. So it's essentially a witch hunt of cases. Then you look at the issues that are plaguing EFCL right now. And I'm not sure if you are aware of the issues with the company that deals with cocoa and the exporting of cocoa, which that would have happened within the last 2 weeks. And what these stakeholders are saying is that essentially if this company shut down, then it could mean basically a collapse of the sector.
And if there was one area where we could at least say, it's difficult to export Trinidad exceptionalism. It's a concept that, and maybe I'm misquoting the concept, and it's not just Caribbean, maybe it's Caribbean. It's a concept that the film Hero, the story inspired by the life of Ulrich Cross, when you see his story and how many of our lawyers had to have been exported because there was a lack of that expertise in the newly independent African nations, right? They had to get them from us. And there are other examples of Trinbagonian exceptionalism. But cocoa is a product that's near the top of the food chain of its industry. It's a physical thing that we could export that is a representation of our Trinbagonian exceptionalism. I don't know, that to me, that's something that we should be looking at to expand for the future.
That's correct, and not necessarily be looking at being in this position that we are in right now, which is that, as I said, the stakeholders are essentially saying that if this company fails or continues to go in the direction that it is presently going in, that could lead to a collapse of the sector. And there are a lot of things in Trinidad which we should have been exporting, or we should have been manufacturing on a larger scale that we just have not, because governments are the ones who have the power. They have failed to put things in place. Example, when you look at pan, there are people manufacturing pan in different parts of the world, and here we basically doing a small production in some cases, and the people can't even get funding to do things at times. So how serious really are we about the things that we have, the resources that we have, the talent that we put out there? a lot of different things. We just are not we just aren't serious about it. You have the issue of NAPA and SAPA and a lot of different issues. Only now the government has passed a bill in Parliament to deal with NAPA and SAPA as two separate entities, similarly to the Queen's Hall model.
Oh,
so I mean, it's a lot of issues.
I mean, don't get me started on NAPA. SAPA has some issues, I think, with regards to their stage and the layout of the stage. But generally speaking, because I did a site visit to SAPA once, I didn't have as much, nowhere near as much issues with regards to the layout, the construction of NAPA. It is, for all intents and purposes, a very impractical, as a performer, as someone who has been on stage, a very impractical white elephant. We have not geared up. I think this is one of those things, again, and with regards to what we said before, we just build things. It's like somebody in government, too many people in the public service or government watch that Kevin Costner movie, if you build it, they will come. If you build the airport, the tourists will come. No. If you build the hotel, the tourists will come. No. If you build Napa, performance artists will come and big crowds will come and no. It doesn't work that way. But, I mean, it's not just how that's being managed. I think what you said with regards to the tourism companies, what you said about the sports companies, at the end of the day, Jamaica has a system with regards to its marketing, and I'm pretty sure their sport and their excellence on the world stage is part of it. And it all feeds back. They figured it out. And we haven't had to figure it out because a madman decided to invade another country, so the price of oil went back up to over $120 a barrel. 622-9338, 622-9376. Call in on anything that you want. However, this morning, I did show a video with regards to China. And Camille, I pointed out something very interesting. I don't know if you'll agree with me. Remember when COVID started and we saw the video, the time-lapse video of China building the hospital in 10 days, how great that was. And then I heard some people say, you know, maybe we need to be more like that. They get things done. They get things done in China. And now looking, there was a video that I showed at the top of the show with regards to the lockdowns in Shanghai. There was an announcement saying, let me get the quote. Control your soul's desire for freedom. Do not open your windows to sing. Do you think TNT would be able to be TNT under something like that?
No. You see, the thing was that we want a lot of things in Trinidad and Tobago as citizens, and yes, we are right to want certain things. We are right to want better. We are right to want better development. But these things come at a certain level of cost in terms of cost being expended by the government, and even a cost that we, the citizens, will have to put out in terms of our behavioral changes, which I think we are not prepared for.
So we have a caller from Aruca. Sorry for the delay. Caller from Aruca, good morning. Are you still with us? You're live.
Morning, sir.
You're live.
I just want to say something before I sing.
Sure.
I born in Trinidad and grew up in St. Vincent. Come back in Trinidad in 1971. And since I come back in this country, I always hear, I think it was in some of the 70s, I sing in the sky, so it is time to have bed in the hospital, and we can hear word from Health Minister Kamal. The dirty water was again with a drink. People say it's clean, but it smells and stink, my friend. Money ain't no problem. And from since that's no. Just imagine. They're not doing anything. I 69 years of age. It's like a real ridiculous, dirty stink, backdated. Anyhow, there's nothing I could do. I'm just a simple poor man, so I just gotta sit down and relax and watch it.
Yes. Well. I mean, for you, caller, maybe, you know, we can't expect you to carry a heavy burden of the future. You know, that should be more expected on people like myself and Kemiel and Keaton and Marquise and Brian and the younger ones. So I mean, but it's interesting. I think before all of this happened, before I was on TV, I had a situation where a friend of mine passed away in Port-au-Spain General, and I did have to wonder with regards to how the hospital was being run, and if her death was avoidable, if the hospital itself was operating more smoothly. Camille, I don't know if you had any similar experiences or questions.
Not necessarily, but yeah, we can't look at the way in which our hospitals are being run, and if it is in fact that we are getting value for money in terms of the overall running of the hospital, because when you look at the fact that equipment is often down, parts take months to arrive at times. I mean, these things are not things that you just manufacture on a daily basis. But I mean, it's just a matter of overall management. We put people in the wrong places, as a previous caller was saying. Lots of times you look at the person who runs the NCRHA and you just wonder, how did that person end up running a hospital? And you look at all the issues from last year. It's a lot of issues, especially with the NCRHA.
I mean, he's not the only political appointment to come under scrutiny within the last couple of years, but he doesn't have a family member in a high position in Parliament, and I'll leave it there. But we could, if we have a caller right now, we could take a caller right now, 622-9338, but it has to be right now. We don't. All right. Let me not risk it because we're coming to a close. I mean, we spoke a lot today. The outlook, Camille, I am concerned. Two things are going to happen. The upheaval globally is only going to get worse as the economic situation globally gets worse, right? Things aren't looking good across the board, and places, India, Peru, Sri Lanka, other places in Latin America, middle of Asia, Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, these places are all under serious threat of significant economic upheaval. And the Caribbean, we're just holding on, to all of the tourism islands. I'm sure they are praying because they have to depend on tourism.
That's it.
So it'll get worse, but then as it gets worse, it's like a feedback loop. The worse it gets, the worse prices gets, the more upheaval we get. And I do wonder, when will TNT reach that point where the upheaval, the political unrest becomes more severe?
As you are saying, a lot of issues to be discussed, to be expressed, and I think it's really a matter of us staying focused on what is at stake right now. And as you are mentioning, we still have COVID. COVID is still around. We aren't out of the pandemic as yet. And even with the issues that are plaguing Ukraine and other parts of the globe, as you mentioned, the issue with Sri Lanka and their port and China and a lot of different things to consider. But I mean, it may seem hopeless at times, but it's a matter for people to still have hope that something good will happen and some turnaround will take place.
Well, I mean, there's a saying, some people might not like it. It is that, good times breed weak men, and then bad times breed strong men. Unfortunately, the weak men lead us into the bad times. So it's a cycle. Maybe we'll come out better in the end. Maybe we got too complacent as a race, as a species, globally. Things were looking good before COVID. At least they were now starting to maybe dip. But maybe we needed a reality check. There have been worse reality checks. It hasn't been as bad as World War II, World War I, the Great Depression. It hasn't been quite that bad yet. I just don't know if we could face anymore. Because as I said just before you came on, blood pressure is up in certain parts of the world. Suicide rates are up in certain parts of the world. People are being stressed out. People lack food to eat. Things are not dire yet, but it's getting there. But meanwhile, let's listen to what you said. Let's have some hope. But there's a saying, I don't believe it's in the Bible, that's often misstated. But there's a saying, God helps those who help themselves. Well, let's just modify it a little bit. Let's do what we can so that when we get opportunities to pull ourselves out of the mess, we don't have to watch them pass us by because we're not ready for it. Well, I guess with that there, we have to end the show. I'm probably over time. That is Mr. Kemiel Pascal, former youth parliamentarian, soon to be the extraordinary political operator that he is. I'm trying to get him in the government. He says he doesn't want to be in it. That's one of the things that we need to avoid. We need more good young people in public service and government. So people, that is the rallying cry. Everybody needs to get more involved. My name is Sean Michael Small. This is the Content Capital. This is Talking Point. We will see you tomorrow morning. Goodbye.
Sean.
Thank you, Kemiel. Thank you very much.
WESN